The cowboy had been searching for a nanny for his baby for 6 months. Apache woman, now I am here. For 6 long months, the cowboy named Cole had carried the weight of single fatherhood on his shoulders, waking before dawn to tend the cattle, prepare feed, mend fences, and soothe a baby girl who didn't yet understand why her mother never came back. And through all those months he'd searched, sometimes desperately, sometimes stubbornly, for someone who could help raise the child with tenderness but also the strength needed to survive life on a remote ranch. Yet every attempt ended the same way. Neighbors offering sympathy but no time. Travelers refusing to stay in such a quiet stretch of land. Hired hands claiming they knew. Children but quitting after a day when they discovered how hard it was to chase cows and comfort a crying toddler at the same time, until one morning when Cole stood outside his porch with the dusty wind brushing across the open land, holding his little daughter, Emma, close as if she were the only soft thing left in his life. He heard the rhythmic beat of hooves approaching from the distance, and as the figure on horseback grew clearer, he noticed it was a woman, an Apache woman with long black hair framing, a face that carried neither fear nor hesitation, only certainty, as though she'd traveled a long way to reach exactly this moment. And when she finally stopped her horse in front of him, she looked at Cole with eyes that seemed to read him faster than any words could, and she said in a calm, steady voice, "Now I am here," leaving him so stunned he nearly forgot to breathe because it felt like the answer to a prayer he'd spoken without knowing. But Cole was a cautious man, and silence stretched between them as he shifted Emma in his arms, studying the stranger's attire. Traditional buckskin, a garment decorated with beadwork that spoke of heritage and endurance, and he realized she looked like someone who had survived. More than most, someone who would not run from hardship. And yet he couldn't help but ask who she was and why she had come, because no one ever traveled this far, unless they had a reason. So she told him her name was Ayanna, and that she had heard about a cowboy raising a child alone, heard that the child had no one else left, heard that the ranch was becoming too much weight for one man who refused to complain. She said she had known loss in her own way and understood that children needed more than protection. They needed presence, patience, and resilience, things not everyone possessed. And she believed she could help if he would allow her, which made Cole's throat tighten because help was something he'd wanted for months, but trusting a stranger felt like stepping into a river without knowing its depth. Yet something about her voice held a quiet truth that left no room for doubt. So he invited her off the horse and into the shade of the porch where Emma stared curiously at the woman who didn't flinch or force a smile but simply acknowledged her with a soft nod as though speaking the silent language of children. And Cole noticed Emma did not cry or hide her face as she often did with new people. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, studying Ayanna with big eyes, and that one tiny gesture struck him more deeply than he expected because Emma's instinct had always been sharp, and if she felt safe, maybe he could too. But still, he asked Ayanna what she expected in return, knowing that kindness without reason was rare out here, and she said all she wanted was a place to belong, somewhere she could trade her hands and her knowledge for shelter. Somewhere she would not be treated as an outsider or a burden, and she added quietly that she had come from a village that no longer needed her as it once had. So she sought a new purpose, one she sensed might be waiting on this ranch. And Cole found himself believing her despite the guarded part of him that warned against trusting too quickly. Yet he also remembered that nothing in life ever changed unless a man allowed it to. So he offered to show her the ranch before deciding anything. And as they walked, Emma riding on Cole's hip while Ayanna moved beside them with a natural ease, she observed the land with the sharp eye of someone who understood survival. The sagging fence lines, the thinning patches of pasture, the barn door hanging crooked, the tired horses whose reins Cole had not had time to oil. And she remarked that the place carried the mark of a man doing the work of 3. A truth Cole couldn't deny. But instead of judging, she simply asked what he wanted the ranch to become. And her question hit him unexpectedly, because no one had asked him about dreams since before Emma was born, and he realized he wanted the ranch to be more than a burden. He wanted it to be a home, a legacy, a place Emma could grow up safely without him fearing each day he might fail her. And somehow saying this aloud felt like loosening a knot inside his chest. Ayanna listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she nodded slowly as though sealing a promise within herself, then knelt beside one of the horses to inspect its hooves, her movements precise and confident. And Cole watched her with growing respect because she handled the animal, not as property but as a living creature with spirit. whispering soothing words until the horse calmed beneath her touch, something even experienced cowhands struggled to do. And when she rose, brushing dust from her hands, Cole felt the first flicker of hope he had allowed himself. In months, not hope born from desperation, but from the possibility that this woman might truly understand the land, the child, and the weight he'd been carrying alone. Yet as afternoon shadows stretched long across the ground and the air turned quieter, Cole knew he needed to be sure of her intentions. So he asked the question that mattered most. Why Emma? Why would a stranger choose to care for a child who wasn't her own? And Ayanna answered that in her people's belief, a child without enough arms to hold her carried a wound that could grow if not tended. And she had seen that kind of wound in her own life and would not let another child bear it if she could help, especially a child who looked at the world with eyes as full as Emma's. And Cole had no reply because something in him, something buried deep under exhaustion and fear, recognized that Ayanna was not here by accident, that her arrival felt less like coincidence and more like a turning point, a moment when the course of their lives quietly shifted without fanfare. And as he lifted his gaze toward the horizon, he sensed that whatever came next would change everything, though he could not yet imagine how or why. Only that the woman who had said, "Now I am here," had spoken the words with the certainty of someone who did not plan to leave easily. And with that thought lingering in his mind, Cole realized that for the first time in months, he was no longer standing entirely alone. Cole hadn't expected that by the next morning Ayanna would already be awake before him, moving through the ranch with a rhythm that matched the land as if she had lived there for years instead of hours. And as he watched her gently grind herbs to make a soothing drink for Emma, he sensed that the ranch itself seemed to breathe easier in her presence. Over the following days, her steady patience and quiet strength blended seamlessly into their routine, transforming tasks that once felt overwhelming into something almost manageable. And Emma, who had cried whenever Cole tried to leave her side to work, began reaching for Ayanna with tiny arms and trusting eyes, something that startled Cole the first time it happened because it felt like a fragile breakthrough he wasn't sure he deserved. Yet even as the ranch grew calmer, Cole remained cautious, wondering if she might leave the moment something better called her away. But that fear slowly faded as he saw how deeply she invested herself in their lives, mending fences with practiced hands, calming skittish horses with whispered words, and teaching Emma soft lullabies from her people, melodies that filled the small cabin at night like threads, stitching their broken pieces together. One evening after finishing chores side by side, Cole and Ayanna sat near the corral watching Emma toddle around in the grass, her tiny laughter carrying a lightness the ranch hadn't heard in months. And Cole found himself opening up about the grief he had buried, the day Emma's mother died, the weeks afterward when he couldn't sleep, the guilt he carried for not being enough for his daughter. Ayanna listened with the same calm focus she'd shown since the moment she arrived, and then she spoke gently about her own losses, about the family she once cared for and the painful emptiness that had followed when life took them away too soon. And in that shared truth, Cole realized they were both mending in different ways, both searching for something to anchor themselves to. As days turned to weeks, something unspoken grew between them, not the sudden spark of romance, but the slow, steady bond of two people learning to trust after being shaped by hardship. And though Cole said nothing about it aloud, he knew the ranch felt different now, less like a battlefield of responsibilities and more like a home, a place where laughter and purpose could live alongside memory and pain. Still, one afternoon a test came that neither expected when a group of riders arrived unannounced, men from a nearby settlement who had heard that an Apache woman was staying on Cole's land, and they accused her of trespassing, claiming she didn't belong there. Cole stood firm, refusing to let them step closer, telling them Ayanna was under his protection and that she had done nothing but help keep the ranch running. But the tension thickened when one man insisted she would bring trouble, speaking with prejudice Cole had seen too many times before. And Emma, sensing the danger, clung to Ayanna's leg in fear. The sight of his daughter, seeking safety in the woman they wanted to drive away, ignited something fierce inside Cole, and he made it clear that anyone who intended harm or disrespect had no place on his land, sending the riders off with a final warning that the ranch was not theirs to judge. After they left, Ayanna stood quietly by the fence, her face unreadable, and she admitted she had expected this sooner or later, because people often feared what they didn't understand. But she also confessed she had feared Cole might let them take her away, believing he might choose peace over her presence. Cole, taken aback, told her plainly that she was not a burden, nor a temporary helper, but someone who had become essential to Emma's happiness and to the very heartbeat of the ranch. And he added that family did not always come from blood. Sometimes it came from those who chose to stay even when the world tried to push them out. That night, as the stars stretched quietly across the sky, Ayanna held Emma close while the toddler drifted to sleep, and Cole watched them with a realization that felt like the final piece clicking into place. He was no longer searching, no longer lost in the exhausting cycle of fear and loneliness, because Ayanna had stepped into their lives with purpose and remained with intention, shaping a path forward he could finally see clearly. And in that understanding, the story that began with a cowboy desperate for help ended with something far greater. 3 lives, once separated by grief and uncertainty, now woven together into a family bound not by circumstance but by choice, by healing, and by the quiet promise that none of them would ever have to face the world alone again.